Hi everyone, it's your boy Zach, and this is my review of G.I. Joe Resolute. I reviewed the first two G.I. Joe animated miniseries from 1983 and 1984. I talked about how the first one from '83 was, I remember it quite fondly, and it held up quite well, even though it was kind of rough around the edges. The second one I found excruciating. I found it to completely lack imagination and just be a 95% of a toy commercial. But then I asked for, what should I check out? And then some people gave me very detailed lists of for the G.I. Joe ongoing series, and they gave me like 10 episodes to watch. And then they said that and G.I. Joe Resolute is on Tubi. And I heard that I got like 4 or 5 emails about this, and I deleted all of them because I was like, I'm not going into any black market hacking sites on the dark web. I thought these were illegal downloads. No, it's an app. It's right there on your phone. They do advertising, and yeah, they don't have the greatest selection on Tubi. And honestly, the application froze like 3 times over the last 24 hours for me. But yeah, they've got the G.I. Joe animated series. They got G.I. Joe Resolute. So I just watched G.I. Joe Resolute, and I have to say, I remember being absolutely obsessed with this back when I first saw it, like a year or so after it came out. It came out when I was in Afghanistan, and then I looked it up, and it had like the wonkiest. It was released as webisodes. Remember webisodes? But it was webisodes on Adult Swim, and then the premiere was on Canadian television. like, I'm pretty sure there were DVDs back in the day in Toys R Us and stuff like that. But even looking for streaming, like it's not on. I couldn't find it on Netflix or Amazon Prime. Apparently, the only place to see it is Tubi. You can just log in with your Facebook account, so it was pretty easy to start it up. And this thing is friggin' perfection. Now, usually, you say this is the G.I. Joe movie that G.I. Joe fans have been waiting for. And it is. But it is also the G.I. Joe fans the G.I. Joe movie that non-fans are waiting for. This is 60 minutes. It's absolutely satisfying as a full story. It's written by Warren Ellis. It's directed by Joaquim Dos Santos, who, if you ever watched Justice League, especially the later seasons, he did a lot of the directing for that. And he has a very particular, awesome, action style. The designs were from people you've heard of, like Dave Johnson, comic book artist, Jeff Johnson, no relation. Oh, I'm blanking on another one. But there was like another, I'm pretty sure Kelsey Shannon did some background designs, or maybe that was a different one. Snakebite Cortez. It was like a bunch of guys that, like, I remember when I first got onto like comics Facebook, all these people were on there. So what it is basically a reboot of the franchise for fans and normie audiences. It was the same year the really disastrous G.I. Joe Rise of Cobra. Oh, that was so painful. I remember I was stationed in Germany. It was before I was rotating back to the States. I had extended my enlistment so I could go to Afghanistan. And I remember literally like seeing that, and then just Snake Eyes had rubber lips on his mask. That was like the first thing they showed. And the movie was pretty horrendously terrible. Weirdly enough, G.I. Joe Retaliation, which came out in what, like 2012? That was excellent. It was supposed to come out in 2011, and then they decided to do a 3D conversion. I will definitely review that one sometime soon. So it's a very interesting thing where they wanted to do, they wanted to do like a mature version of G.I. Joe, supposedly for the fans, but then they contacted Warren Ellis, and he basically said, G.I. Joe means nothing to me. I never watched it. I didn't grow up with it. Why are you contacting me? They're like, because that's what we want. We want an outsider's perspective. So honestly, he must have done a deep dive because he understands the characters and concepts very well. I'm thinking he probably watched the miniseries and then kind of did, it just like the first two miniseries, they have this weapon that can a beam energy weapon that can project power across the globe to a pinpoint location. But this one is like they explain how this works, and I get confused easily when even in simple action movies where they start explaining the canister goes into the module and then it just I'm already confused. You said two things, keep it to one. So they're superheating the ionosphere, which blocks satellite communications, which allows Cobra to operate more freely. And then they have a beam weapon that goes, hits the ionosphere, and then it kind of, how would I say, emanates outwards, moves around the globe, and then hits another target. You can also put spoilers, yourself, because that's what they do at the end. So it becomes, so they establish the stakes very quickly. The thing is, there's all these great nods to specifically the animated TV show. I'm not sure that Warren Ellis really read the comics. So, no, I think he got some word because at one point there is a, it's good for, it's mainly, update of the cartoon, but there's references to the comics at one point, and all of the dialogue is very sparse and it's just very well done. And Scarlet is told to choose, and she says she's always been going back and forth between Snake Eyes and Duke. The thing is, that doesn't really exist in the previous cartoons or the comics. That's a meld of the two. It's always weird when you're watching, when you read the comics and Snake Eyes is the love interest, and then you watch the earlier cartoons and it's Duke. So that was interesting. There's a couple other Cobra Commander references pretending to be weak and cowardly as a way to lull people to a false sense of security. So that's a good reference to the cartoons. But basically, the stakes are established very quickly. He demonstrates the weapon on Moscow. He kills 10 million people, and then it's a race to go stop him as quickly as possible. They break things. This thing is really the best of all worlds. First of all, the animation is fantastic. I will say the only thing that doesn't quite work is they built this really cool U.S. flag that actually has two runways on it. It's kind of like a fork design. And they were very, very proud of that. And so like half of the chapters start with kind of like a dated, 3D animation of the flag on the ocean. So I was like, Some of the vehicles flying, it doesn't work that well. But it's a mix of 2D animation for the people and then 3D animation for the weapons and vehicles. The weapons works 100% of the time. The ground vehicles work most of the time. The airplanes, they don't. It doesn't really work as good. But the designs are freaking cool as hell. There's this interesting thing where they kind of like play down like the G.I. Joes. They don't have like G.I. Joe on the side of their vehicles. Duke just has the word army on his LBV or his plate carrier. And it's very much, I would hesitate to call it realistic because it's more they found like a middle ground between the original TV show and like superhero type of look. And everyone looks cool as hell. The weapons look freaking amazing. The storytelling is great, specifically the animation. And again, this is hard to explain if you haven't studied animation, but there's something called moving holds. And especially in 2D animation, stopping and then right before a movement and then accelerating very quickly into the next one. There's some points where it's just like Snake Eyes pulling a sword from a scabbard, and the way they do the moving holds is so powerful. If you're not an animation, not expert, but aficionado, you might not quite be able to quantify why it's so good, but it truly is. So we get the classic things: Storm Shadow, Snake Eyes rivalry, Duke, Scarlet romance, but it's very quick. It's very fast paced. You have you have Snake Eyes. There's like a couple different basically missions that all coalesce. Snake Eyes. Then there's Scarlet and Duke. Then there's another team with Gung Ho, Stalker, and Roadblock. And then there's another one with Torpedo? Is it Torpedo? And then they go up into the atmosphere. All of them are really well done. I will say one thing. So I did a little bit of due diligence, and Warren Ellis said originally he had written dialogue for like all the Joes, and then they had to coalesce it to give most of the dialogue to a few Joes just because of budgetary reasons. You're gonna notice some really fake sounding accents, and it turns out that like every voice actor did like 4 to 8, and there aren't a lot of characters and there aren't a lot of speaking roles. So you start noticing, you're like, what the hell is up with Stalker's voice? It's really kind of odd, but it's like this. I think the guy who did Duke also did Stalker and Roadblock, and like when you see the credits, you're like, what the hell is going on here? Yeah, they save a little money. I tried to look up what the budget was for this. I could not find a budget. If you know the budget, please let me know. I would be very interested. It looks like, I feel like if they would have put 10 more minutes into this, animated movies of this type of thing never do that well in the theaters. But it is very satisfying. I talked about how the second G.I. Joe, miniseries was just excruciating because it was 5 22-minute episodes. So, 110 minutes. This was 60 minutes. It was just perfect. And again, if you know nothing about G.I. Joe, I almost guarantee that you will love this still. It is completely fantastic. So go check it out. G.I. Joe Resolute. Apparently, I looked it up on YouTube. I think there are some versions on YouTube, but I don't know the resolution. I probably oversold the problems with Tubi. I've got an old, this freaking cell phone is so done. It literally like dies when it's at like 48% battery and I'm watching YouTube videos. So I shouldn't blame the Tubi app. I'm guessing that the Tubi app TUBI will work well for you. So go check it out. And then I think I am going to bebop around it and just watch those good episodes. I actually pinned it to, I pinned that comment on the review of the second miniseries so I can go back to it, and I'm going to watch all those. So anyway, thanks for watching. Bye.